Welcome back to the Hill of Roses, where we come once again to celebrate the best contributors to our united progressive movement. With me today, I have Kamran Mian. Cameron, say hello to the audience out there.
Hello, audience of the Hill of Roses. I hope I got that right. I really like that name. I hadn't really thought about it until now. So thank you for having me on the show.
Well, we're glad to be able to have you on, Cameron, and thank you so much. I enjoyed the name even after I moved away from self-identifying with the rose myself. I still think there's a lot of value in having this united progressive movement to really bring people together to talk about the issues. And with that being said, before we get into the top three issues that brought you on today to have this conversation, do you mind letting the rosebuds out there know a little bit more about yourself, where you're from, as well as what you do?
Yeah, I'm from a little bit outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, so East Coast. So the time zone thing works well for me for the interview timing. Sorry, that was unnecessary. But I'm a musician. I'm in college, but it's like I'm not taking any classes right now. I just have to go down to take a test later this spring. I've done all my other course requirements. So basically just practicing for this one test I have to take, and then I'll be done with that. And basically my I'm a musician who wants to freelance and sing and play in the area. So it's kind of like, well, that was one of the things that attracted me to some of the policy proposals in Yang's platform and some other progressives, that I felt like, that the way that I would want to live my life is supported by some of their proposals. So I'm not going to go too far, but that's it. I'm mostly a percussionist. There's a xylophone here you have back here. My test is I was seated at a keyboard right now. It's where it was the easiest place to take my interview. But other than that, I mostly just sing and play percussion instruments, so like drums and stuff like that. But anyway, that's enough about me. I go on too long.
No, that's very cool, man. And hearing that you're at your keyboard and such, maybe occasionally there's going to be a little bit of musical notes that'll come into play there. But I'm glad to be able to have you on, Cameron. And you brought up some very interesting topics to be able to discuss today. I think a lot of them touch on some of the key themes that have really encompassed most of the conversations on this channel. The first of which has been uniting populists. The second is UBI plus VAT as a policy proposal. And the third is restructuring our foreign policy. I wanted to focus first on that first subject, uniting populists. How do you define populism, as well as how did this become one of your top priorities?
Well, I guess I define it as a populist as being somebody who works maybe in government, who supports somebody who works in government, or somebody who advocates for policies or ideas that put everyday Americans first. It's sort of as sort of an alternative to I don't know, like trickle down economics or something, if we're talking about economics, or an alternative to the um, I mean, but I don't want to like put too many labels on. It's like populist for the people. That's it. But it's I don't want to like put too many, because I feel like a lot of times when people define it, they'll put the box like really narrow. Like our current president hasn't really helped the situation, because since he's been in office, and people compare the promises he made on the campaign trail to what's happened and then you hear a lot of Sanders supporters or left wing populists. Oh, like it becomes a justification that right wing populism is fake, which hurts the right wing populist movement. And it's like, well, we could work with these people, or we could try to go our own way and then have this battle later. So I don't know. That's how I define it, I guess.
Yeah,
Sorry, what
no,
was the second part of what you were saying?
no, I think that's first interesting because I would agree with your definition first and foremost that populist really means for the people. It doesn't necessarily mean left or right. There are multiple variations of it, but it's that you're actually trying to listen to what the voters are asking for and trying
Yeah.
to do that. So it can be trickle up economics on more of maybe the left leaning side versus the right. A lot of it tends to be maybe more uh, social or cultural things that are really popular within that party.
Or like some Some economic, maybe a little bit more government involvement than like say a more libertarian idea, like sort of set of ideas,
Yeah.
but more along the lines of nationalism with regard to foreign policy and some government intervention still. But
Yeah, no, I can definitely hear you there. So I'm curious, why does uniting this group of people become such a big priority for you?
for me, I think it's a matter. I sort of see it as I look at our current situation and I'm like okay, what is in my order of operations for what I think would make sense for somebody trying to come into politics or trying to be a leader in this country is, what is the order of operations for achieving sort of populist goals? So it's like one approach is you can just be consistent over a long period of time and talk about and then have this one sort of set approach and be like, this is what this is, and be able to go back to that stump speech really quickly and just to be able to go and do that. And you might have people that disagree with you, but then they'll decide, you know what, I'm going to get on board with this, and this, like, this is what I'm doing, you can get on board or you cannot. Or you can say, okay, like, let's make populism any kind of pop, like let's make some kind of pop, let's make populist ideas all across the spectrum the new normal, because there's still this neoliberalism, neoconservatism that's, and then I feel like once that's flushed out and once we get basic core ideas, populist ideas, like certain things that vast majorities of people can agree on, like ending the forever wars and certain other things, then you can have that dispute. I feel like after that, then you can say and draw the different, and then you can make. But I feel like if populism isn't the new normal first, and then what you might see is one specific kind of populism come up, and then then there could be, as people start to disagree, there could be more division within populist camps. And what kinds of groups seize on those divisions for their own gain? Neoliberals, neoconservatives. So I think it's just a difference of approach. I think that uniting, I think that seeing and this is something that I'd probably like to say often. It's like, okay, let's get these basic things done, then we can have the culture war after. But I mean, yeah, I do believe there are some social issues that should be litigated. And I think there are a lot more populists that don't fit into the mold of democratic socialism or into the mold of like a Josh Hawley or like a Tucker Carlson kind of right wing populism. Like there are so many, and there's the kind of like what some people refer to as like left libertarian contingent, which isn't really libertarian, but it's more like a lot of Yang Gang folks and or folks who are like maybe sort of pseudo nationalism, but some left economic things like some Gabbard supporters. And I think there are huge differences with regard to an approach to foreign policy and other issues among populist camps. But if we can find some kind of basic solution, I mean, and you could have it where one side comes up and then another, it could just be a lot messier that way. And it's, and I believe in a lot of candidates on the stage or in the presidential election, they talk about unity, and that I think that's very important. But the issue is who do you unite with? Most of the people who talk about unity, it's like, no, I'll work across the aisle with the corporatist Republicans or like but
No, I
uh,
hear you. Like, there's two things that you kind of said in the beginning of that statement as like the thesis. You can either unite around one central vision and call that populism, or you can kind of foster an environment in which multiple branches of populism can emerge. And it sounds like you appreciate more this latter approach, where we're
definitely.
not approaching it with just one vision. My question for you is, how do you unite something that is naturally designed to splinter? Because essentially, as you said, they have all these different visions of how populism can be formed. But if you look at it compared to the existing bodies that are already united, these neoliberal cores and neoconservative cores, although they may outnumber them in total, they're not united. So how
Yeah.
do you unite them in your opinion?
Ideally, the way, and this is of course the way I'd like to see it, so that's convenient for me. But it's like I think that the first step in is just not necessarily trying to say, okay, here are all these things. Let's get it. It's like making only sort of a few, having a few core key ideas that are broad in appeal and more focused on economic goals and foreign policy goals and not touching, and for now not touching social issues really much at all, and not being unless there are some groups, there are kinds of populists, some populist pundits or people in our Congress who probably end up caring more about the social issues than the economic issues, or they're like, oh, the inter it's intersectional or bust. It's all interrelated and you cannot separate them. Well, I'm more of the idea that you should separate some things at first, just in order and get a few concepts, because and those people the populists that do prioritize the social issues more than the economic issues are usually more fringe, I think, to the outside. Like one person on the right who's made this case is like the online pundit who I guess was recently banned from YouTube, Nick Fuentes, who I guess is a nationalist sort of, but he was doing that four-way XY axis, and he was like, oh, he said populism was basically right wing, but he was like, oh, better for us to align with the neoconservatives than ally with the populist left because because the social issues. And so I feel like if people are able to come together just on a few economic goals first and be like, yes, we don't agree with everything, let's just make this range of options the new normal and get a few things, just unite on a few things. All it may take is a few things, because that's really, if you're a president, if you're thinking about the executive branch or whatever, I mean, they really only have, once they get into office, a couple shots to get into Congress. So there's really not like even a lot of it's not like people are just going to go down the list of their proposals and then that's going to be it just doesn't work like that. So if you can just unite on a few things and then not be socially alienating, unless if you're woke and you insist on it being more social, but those are generally more to the fringe or more neoliberal leaning anyway. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with this overall approach. I think I would add to that economics and foreign policy likely some democracy reforms too. Just like how we can have a more representative democracy. I think like that corruption reform. But I agree generally that you need a base level of policies that are going to unite these factions, and that needs to be prioritized more when we're making these alliances. I'm kind of curious what some of those might be. Like, I know you say you want economics, but I think economics even can sometimes be divisive in how you get there. Like the right wing tends to be like more you free the middle class by reducing taxes on them, while the left populists would say you decrease this economic inequality by providing programs and services. What do you think are some of those key uniting points currently for the populist movement?
The disdain with sort of the means-tested social safety net approach.
Okay.
I think it's fine. What you have to do, and this is something with the Yang campaign that I think was not necessarily addressed in the best way. And I don't know if you have this, but when he was talking about his value-added tax or talking about his UBI, and he's definitely made clear over and over that he wouldn't abolish certain safety net like he wouldn't abolish the current social safety net. But when he was talking about as a VAT, he didn't get questioned very often, or maybe sometimes about, okay, the biggest sorry, I'm good. The biggest from the left, the biggest critique was, oh, the VAT is regressive. He didn't, I feel like when he was bringing up that, whether it was on the debate stage or something else, like I feel like that's the core, because if the group you're actually, it's like if the group you're trying to appeal with this tax is the left-wing populists, then like, because I feel like a libertarian or a right-wing populist would be more likely to understand, like, look at the implications of a VAT in the way Yang was doing it. Like, you have to say out of the bat, okay, and I don't think he was very clear as much as money because he said, okay, we'll do it at half the European rate. We'll we'll exempt low income products. We'll hike on luxury goods and pair it with UBI. And you don't. It doesn't take that long to make that case, and it doesn't have to get too technically wonky to be. But I feel like if you're introducing a VAT and you're running a Democratic primary in which you're basically a left wing populist, that is like those are core things you have to commit to because I think a lot of probably left wing populists still view the value added tax as regressive and are like wealth tax or bust. And it's like, so.
I mean, I hear you there. So what you're saying is that some of these proposals, like a UBI, as we'll get into as your second priority, are these combinations of left wing and right wing ideas. That's kind of what we need to embrace, putting them together. Like, for example, the VAT was popular, as you said, with more libertarian or right wing populists, while the idea of giving money as a redistribution is more of a popular left wing idea. Are you saying that the future is trying to find ways to combine the ideas together? Is that what?
Maybe, yeah, I mean, maybe that can be something that works. I don't think you can combine everything. I do think though, if you can tap into it, because people don't trust everyday Americans don't trust two sort of groups. It's private corporations and the government. They don't trust either one of them. So if you can find, and that was one of the things that was so appealing about UBI and democracy is because like UBI didn't require government intervention or a massive government bureaucracy in order to deal with it. So it could appeal to vast majorities of groups. And if you come out and if you say like, okay, non-regressive VAT, this generates more revenue than a wealth tax in order to pay for these kinds of programs. And I think the centrist argument that you make for something like UBI or Medicare for all or some other proposals like, okay, the numbers don't check out. Well, yeah, Americans would probably rather have their basic needs met, even if it means like increasing the national debt or whatever.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
hey,
and
that's what
right-wing
normal
populists are already
Americans
like,
do.
oh,
That's what normal Americans do currently. They'll run up a debt just to keep themselves alive. I think they
yeah,
understand when the country is doing that. I think it's kind of an interesting dynamic, having these combined populist forces, because fundamentally, I think what we're really trying to get at is more benefits to satisfy the left with less bureaucracy to satisfy those libertarians and more right wing people. And so
yeah,
I've always advocated that there's kind of four pillars that we need to keep in balance for a society to function. You have your private institutions, your corporations essentially. You have your government, which is your public force of power. You have the people themselves, the individual citizens, and then you have the environment. And right now we have one in extreme weight in private institutions and how they're able to suck all this money out of the economy and not pay taxes back. However,
well,
we also have government, which is above us too, in power versus the people, because they're not respecting our wishes when we say we want to get legislation done. And so we need to have more policies that put more power directly into people's hands and that protect an environment that's currently being exploited for short-term gains. I wanted to know, in your mind, are there any other policies that you could think of that put more power directly into people's hands?
well, the stock answer for a Yang supporter would be something like democracy dollars, or there are things that might not put economic resources directly into people's hands, but they might provide people with different kinds of opportunities, like that they might not normally have, like some things with healthcare or with this was something that hadn't been talked about a lot in the Yang campaign, but the foreign exchange or the intranational exchange program for high school students.
Yeah.
And these are things that might, although that's an example of a program where it might require a big government bureaucracy in order to deal with it. So that's kind of another one where it's like that's not really a good example. But
No, it's all good, but I understand what you're saying that it doesn't have to necessarily be a direct like cash like benefit or government program that needs to be set up, but just providing more opportunities. So like raising the baseline from having no opportunities to saying, hey, this is maybe an optional exchange program rather than a mandatory exchange program, and it can help both those areas. I hear what you're saying that it doesn't have to be like directly economic empowerment. And
Well, but usually
I think
that's the
ranked
best is just
choice.
putting resources into people's
I think
yeah,
a
into
good
people's hands.
example would be actually ranked choice voting, for
Yeah,
example,
yeah.
because you have this whole narrative currently going on where you're going to have this potentially contested convention for the Democratic Party, where you're going to basically have these super delegates have influence on which direction it's going to go. With ranked choice voting, you're instead of delegates making that decision, you're again taking this power and moving it back to the people. Because now instead of delegates realigning to what their second or third choices might be and power negotiating during this convention, the people will directly say who their second and third choices are instead.
But with that being said, it's really interesting to sort of notice how the conversation on ranked choice voting has changed on the part of the more centrist Democratic establishment when they start, combining these candidates like
Yeah.
let's combine, and so then they're suddenly like, oh, so it's kind of interesting. I'd be interested to sort of see where that
Yeah.
might go if
I
they're
I
and
agree.
some one person like I think Adam Green, Warren's one of Warren's spokespeople was saying like he was comparing the process to ranked choice voting, which some people think is a false equivalence, but
It
it's
is.
interesting to sort of see
Yeah, I mean, I
how that
hear
might
his
play out.
I hear his point. Like it is semi-ranked choice voting, but the difference is how many people get their hands on it. It's like saying a caucus is ranked choice voting. In that, it's
Ugh.
just what we need to do is put this power in more people's hands. And so a caucus forces you to be somewhere at a specific time. It's hard for people with disabilities to potentially attend or poor people or people with kids, and so it limits the audience. Similarly, a convention does the same thing. It says only these people can attend and have their voice heard. Ranked choice voting nationally, though, puts that just into more people's hand instead of government's hand to choose who they want as super delegates.
Yeah, I mean, with regard to ranked choice voting, I was speaking to somebody, I think in December or early January, who was probably leaned more libertarian, but who kind of supported Yang, who was saying like that he likes the idea of quadratic voting, which I guess is like you assign a percentage of the vote
Mm,
or an amount of the vote to a candidate. So like you can have like 85% of your vote go to Bernie Sanders or something, and then that measures hard support and soft support
yep.
for candidates. They can get more metrics. If there's a way to do that where where you don't want it to become like a caucus situation where actually getting those totals can become like
Oh
fraught with
yeah.
error.
I think
But if there's a
something
way to
like that.
institute it where it can work, the thing with quadratic is there are a lot of different ways of doing it. So it's kind of like if there's a
Yeah.
way to do it where it's easy to count and it's really and there are a lot of like weird loopholes closed, I think that would have like the advantages of ranked choice voting, but not maybe.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and I talked about this in a previous episode for someone who had ranked choice voting as one of their top things. I'd recommend everyone out there go check out score voting. It kind of accomplishes a lot of what you're saying. You just rank
Okay,
each candidate 1 to 7. But with that being said, I now want to just take a quick break before we get back into our second part and talk about your second priority in UBI. As I think we
cool.
already talked about it a little bit, but I think we have a lot more to discuss. So
Okay, yeah,
we'll be
sorry, I
right
kind of went
back.
off. I didn't really even answer your questions that well. So
No, no, no. Don't worry about that. There's plenty of more questions to be answered. We're gonna take a quick break. Everyone, come back for part 2 where we discuss UBI.